Hey there, John Morris here. I'm the lead developer for the Wishlist Member Certified Developers Program and the CEO at johnmorrisonline.com. In this video, we're going to talk about what responsive web design is. And the reason I want to talk about that is because there's often a lot of confusion or misunderstanding or simply just a lack of information when it comes to exactly what responsive web design is. I also think it's important to set the context or the conceptual framework for the rest of the course so you understand what it is that you're actually going to be learning how to do. And if you're not familiar with exactly what responsive web design is, then that can be pretty difficult. So again, here we're going to talk about what it is and a little bit about some of the things that you're going to learn throughout the course. So I'm here on this particular page because this is really the birthplace of responsive web design. And what this is an article on A List Apart, and it's an article by Ethan Marcotte, who was really kind of the first person to coin the term responsive web design. And so we're here at the birthplace of responsive web design to kind of take a look at exactly what it is. And if you haven't read this article, then you'll definitely want to. You can see the URL up here, alistapart.com/article/responsive web design. Of course, I'll post a link where this video is posted so that you can visit that article as well. I highly recommend that you read this article because it really gives you a good conceptual framework for what responsive web design is and what it is that you're attempting to achieve. You notice here that this article was written May 25th of 2010. So this has actually been around for quite a while, over 3 years now, but it's really just kind of starting to take hold in terms of it being essentially required when building your own site or especially building sites for clients. And so you can see this has kind of been a growth, and it's really revolutionized in a lot of ways, and I'm going to talk about some of that as we go through this, but it's revolutionized what we do and how we think in terms of web design. So again, I highly recommend reading this article just so you've kind of been to, again, the birthplace of a responsive web design and you get what the original thinking behind it was. Now, obviously, I'm going to go through and talk about what's in this article and then also talk about responsive web design in general. But again, if you haven't, definitely want to go and read this article. So in order to understand responsive web design, you have to understand what it actually is attempting to do. And responsive web design isn't, it's not really like a lot of things on the web where it's some new kind of feature that you are attempting to implement. It's actually the solution to a problem. And that's really the first big point to get, is that responsive web design is born out of solving what has become an increasingly difficult problem for web designers. Now I'm going to head over here to a screenshot to give you a little bit of what that problem is. So what you're looking at here, and this actually isn't even all of them, because you can go, there's devices that have smaller resolutions than what's shown here, but I think this gives you a good idea of exactly what the problem is. What you're looking at here is a number of different resolutions that a device that your web browser or your website could be viewed by. So you can see that we have all the way down to 640 by 480, all the way up to 1920 by 1200. And it gives you percentages of what screen sizes tend to be viewed at what rate. And so you can kind of get a feel for that. But what this shows you is that there's all different kinds of screen sizes that could be viewing your website. And if you're designing to just one, then it can be very difficult. Your site can end up looking pretty terrible if it's not built responsively in a different screen size. Now, back in the early days of the internet, that wasn't really a problem because the main way that people were viewing websites was on a computer, and the screen resolutions were within a small enough range that you could build a website at a certain size and be relatively assured that it would show up correctly on the screen. So, back in the early days when screen resolutions were 800 by 600, then standard widths on a, say, fixed layout might be something like 600 pixels wide. Now, as technology improved and those resolutions got better, you've probably seen kind of the classic 960 or 980 pixel width fixed layout. That kind of for a while became the standard width that was used when building websites. However, today, as those devices became, the browsers that use them, mobile devices, became more capable, you started getting a lot more variation in the screen size, and it was a large enough percentage. You can see here, you have 20% that view it on a 1024 by 768. That actually on here, I believe, is the highest percentage. So that's not even what most computer screens are probably set at. Most computer screens are probably at least 1366 by 768, but probably even more so up in the 1680 by 1050 or 1920 by 1080. But you can see that 1680 by 1050 is only 10%. And 1920 by 1080 is 2.3%. What that tells you is that a large number of people are viewing the internet via some sort of mobile device, a tablet, a phone, and so forth. Not only do you have the problem then of these mobile devices and all these different screen resolutions, but you also have the growing market of large screens like TVs and so on. And so you're getting your website viewed on devices that are also much larger, and you have the high resolutions of the Retina display of the iPads and those devices. So the problem here is that the variation between what screen resolution will be viewing your website is significant. It's not necessarily that it's small or that it's large. It's that you have a lot of people who are viewing it on a large size and you have a lot of people viewing it on a small size, and you have to be able to design for both. Now, back in the early days when this started happening, what a lot of people or a lot of designers and websites started doing was building a mobile version of their website. So you've probably been to a site that's like m dot, whatever the site may be, or mobile dot, or it may be the domain .mobi or something along those lines. And they would build, instead of, they'd have their desktop version, which may be a 960 pixel width fixed layout, and then they would build, let's say, a 480 width fixed layout. And that worked for a little bit because a lot of the screen sizes early on, the screen resolutions for mobile devices were pretty similar, but that quickly started not working because the screen resolutions became so varied that even if you're building a mobile version of your site, building it 480 pixel width, well, if you're viewing that on a 1024 by 768, it's still, you're not using all of the screen real estate, and it's still not going to look that great. So that was when the idea of responsive web design was born. And so what this idea is generated out of is actually, it's interesting because Ethan Marcotte in this article, and you'll notice as you read it, talks about the idea of responsive architecture. What responsive architecture is this idea that architecture responds to its environment and primarily responds to the people that are around it. So he talks about things like walls and different building architecture that would either change color or change shape as people approached it, and it would respond to the people that were around it. I only bring that up because I think it's kind of cool that that's one, the idea in general, and two, that's kind of where this idea was spawned for him as he developed this idea of responsive web design. But that's really the idea of what responsive web design is as well, is that your website should respond to its environment. It should respond to what it's being viewed on. So what device and primarily what screen resolution is viewing it. It should respond to that to show the optimal display for that particular device. Now, it can be pretty difficult, as you might imagine, if you were to try and build a different layout for each one of these screen resolutions. You probably have 10 or 15 just here alone, and this really isn't even all of them. So trying to build 10 or 15 different layouts for your website could become pretty cumbersome. So the idea of responsive web design is that you kind of pick and choose the different target resolutions that you want to hit, and then you build your site in such a way where those in-between sizes, it will still respond and still work for those in-between sizes. So responsive web design, then, to break it down, all the conceptual talk, to break it down to the nuts and bolts of what it is it's an approach to web design. So it's, in a way, it's letting go of these hard, rigid layouts based on pixel widths. So that doesn't mean that you're not still going to think about pixel widths, but it's letting go of the rigidity that has so long been a part of web design. And that comes a lot from where the internet, the way that things have been adapted to the internet. So a lot of graphic design, web design comes out of graphic design, which is based on a lot of print work. And print work, you have fixed widths that you're working with, because you have fixed widths in terms of paper size, and you know what you're designing to, and you don't have to really worry about all these different things that you have to design to. So a lot of that rigidity comes from that. However, the internet is quite different and now is much more fluid. And so you have to take the approach of understanding that any design that you build is going to be viewed in a multitude of different screen resolutions. And so you have to take the approach. It's really just understanding that trying to make a rigid, complicated design probably isn't going to play well in all of the different designs, or all the different screen resolutions and devices that are going to view your design. So you have to kind of let go of that first and foremost and take a more fluid approach to your designs. Now, that is why you see the rise of things like, one trend that's highly related to this that I don't think a lot of people really put two and two together on it, is the idea of flat design. And so flat design is essentially the idea that you get rid of kind of complex image-oriented designs. You kind of get rid of gradients and a lot of the shadows and things like that, and you go with a more flat, basic design. So when you do a box, for example, let's come down here. When you're doing boxes, like things like this, you'll notice there's no gradients on here. You have simple boxes. This is a very flat design. There's no gradients involved with any of this stuff here. Even this box over here, it's transparent, but it's still all flat and gradient. And that's simply the idea of designing for a mobile oriented device, keeping it simpler and allowing it to be a lot more fluid and easier to work with, instead of a sort of complicated design. So flat design is really a trend that's driven by the mobile movement that's happening, and the responsive web design is developed in there. You've probably seen a lot of icon fonts recently. That's a big trend that's mobile related, because a lot of devices are going to be low bandwidth, so you can load a font and then use those icons and cut down on the amount of bandwidth, as opposed to using large images for your site and so forth. So a lot of those trends are based around this mobile movement. Responsive web design is definitely one of those. And so again, it's just an approach of looking at your designs and understanding that they need to be fluid. From there, there's really two other things. One is a set of methods or approaches that you take to how you build your site responsive, and then the actual individual skills that you need to learn in order to make your site responsive. So there's a couple different approaches that you can use when building your design. One is a liquid layout. So we'll go ahead and look at one. So this is an example of a liquid layout. You notice oftentimes liquid layouts take up the entire screen, and you'll notice that as we resize this screen, then it responds to fit the screen size. Okay, now there is a little bit of some of the other approach, which is a fluid grid going on here, but especially kind of the slider and so forth is a little bit more of a liquid design. Liquid designs, again, usually take up the entire screen. It'll be based primarily off percentage width, so all the widths in here will be percentages, and they will simply shrink as the screen size shrinks. Okay, so it's a very liquid design, and as the screen gets bigger, of course, they'll also expand. So that's one approach, is the liquid approach. The second approach, which is probably more common, is, we'll go ahead and head over here, is more of what's called a fixed or a fluid grid, or I call it fixed responsive, whatever term you want to use. But a fluid grid like this is essentially you're still using fixed widths, but those widths change as the site or the screen gets smaller or bigger. So for example, you'll notice by default this is essentially a fixed width. It's not taking up the whole screen. It's all contained within kind of a fixed width grid here in the middle. However, as we resize this screen, then things are going to get, when we reach a certain point, then it kind of, everything flips into a top to bottom type setup. Okay, and so this site is actually based off Bootstrap, and Bootstrap uses a fluid grid. And essentially the way it works is at a certain width it displays kind of normal like this. As that shrinks, as that width gets smaller, it'll reach a certain width, and then it will actually flip to where it's more of a top to bottom type setup. And so that's more of what a fixed grid type setup looks like, and we're going to get more into this. And then obviously you could also do a combination of the two when building your site, and in ways you're kind of always doing a little bit of a combination, but those are the two kind of main ways of thinking about how you're going, or the two approaches about building a responsive site. The other things, the second kind of part of that is the skills, the individual skills that you need to know when building a responsive site. So the main skills that we're going to be talking about, the main skills that you need to know when working with a responsive site are, first off, media queries. Media queries are what actually allow you to build a responsive site so that you can change the styling based off of the screen width or the screen resolution that you're working with. So media queries are kind of the foundational skill. You pretty much have to use media queries for everything that you're doing when it comes to responsive web design. And obviously throughout the course we're going to cover that. Next is percentage widths, so relative widths. So basically, instead of coding things based off of hard pixels widths, you tend to use more of percentage widths, so that as the screen adjusts or expands or contracts, the width actually adjusts so that everything will still fit on the screen. What you don't want is a design where when you shrink the screen you have overlap, so that someone has to use the bottom scroll bar to scroll right or left. Okay, that's essentially what we're avoiding here, because if you've ever done that on a mobile device, you know how annoying that is. It's not a very good experience for users, and it really makes your site pretty difficult to navigate. So percentage widths is the other skill. Floats, we've kind of already talked about that, how when everything moves from a side to side type setup to a top to bottom type setup, the skill really behind that is floats. And so we're going to talk about how to use floats to position things correctly And you're going to use it again in combination with media queries and percentage widths. It all kind of goes hand in hand. The fourth skill is flexible images. So talking about how to scale your images and the different points at which you want to do that, how to use background positioning and background size for background images, how to use percentage widths and so forth for flexible images, kind of front end images or inline images. So we'll talk about how to do all that. And then responsive typesetting, which is probably one that gets overlooked a lot when people talk about responsive web design, is how to actually set up your type so that it is responsive as well, because there's a lot of science that goes into how text is displayed on a screen, things like characters per line, line height, so on and so forth. So we're going to talk about responsive typesetting and how to build your type in a way that it responds to the device that it's on, the screen resolution that it's working with, so that you don't end up with font that's too big, too small, too many characters per line so that it looks cramped, and so on and so forth. So those are the two main things that we're going to cover throughout the rest of the course, is the approaches and then the individual skills to actually make those approaches happen. Obviously, we're going to go into example builds for each one of these things and actually show you how to build a site using the liquid layout, using a fluid grid, and so forth, how to use media queries, percentage widths, all the individual skills we're going to cover. And then we'll talk about frameworks that help make a lot of this easier, but also talking about how to use those frameworks, how to pick one, how to use them, because there's always, it's not, even when you use a framework, it's not 100% foolproof. There's still some tweaking and things that you're going to need to do, but by using a framework, it makes a lot of this a lot easier. You just need to kind of pick the right ones for what your project is. So that's what we're going to kind of cover throughout the rest of the course. That's essentially what responsive web design is. And by the time that you're done, you're going to have the confidence to sit down and build your website in a responsive manner, build a client website in a responsive manner from the start, so that your website, whatever you're building, whether it's for you or a client, will look great across all devices. All right, so that is kind of the intro to responsive web design and the course as a whole. Hopefully you enjoyed that.